What if the one person we laugh at, the fool, is actually the one who sees most clearly? Across myths, tarot cards, literature, and even comedy, the fool stands at the edge of chaos and wisdom, dancing between innocence and insight. He may trip, joke, or wander blindly, but his path holds a secret. Transformation begins not in certainty, but in surrender. In a world obsessed with success and seriousness, the fool dares to be real, and that might just be the bravest wisdom of all. The fool is one of the most familiar and oddly comforting characters across cultures and throughout history. From ancient times to now, fools have caught people off guard, made them laugh, and held up a mirror to the absurdity of life. We often admire foolishness in others, and even allow ourselves to act a little foolish from time to time. It's a core part of who we are, an archetype we're born with. Yet many of us go through life starved of this playful spirit. We're too busy being efficient, serious, and overcommitted, trapped in a world that celebrates hustle over humor. It's no wonder so many people feel drained and uninspired. We forget that play is essential to being human, and when we lose touch with that, we also lose our spark, our spontaneity, our joy, and even our authenticity. Letting the fool back in doesn't mean becoming reckless. To stay grounded, we need to balance the fool with the archetype of the sage, the wise one who stays humble, aware that they don't know everything, and who isn't afraid to laugh at themselves now and then. These archetypes aren't just labels, they're living parts of us. They're deeply emotional, tied to how we experience the world. The fool especially defies easy definition. People often see them as clueless, socially awkward, or naive. But at their core, fools often carry a kind of innocence and honesty that many of us have lost. The word fool comes from the Latin phallus, originally referring to bellows pumping out empty air. It's a funny image. Someone full of hot air, maybe saying silly things. But bellows also bring air to fire, and in that same way, the fool brings energy and lightness to life. In 1511, Erasmus wrote In Praise of Folly, a bold and witty book that gives folly herself a voice. She jokes that nobody ever praises her, so she'll do it herself, and argues that life would be unbearably dull without her. Her sharp critiques didn't go unnoticed. Friends warned Erasmus that making fun of the church was dangerous, but even clergymen found the book hard not to enjoy. Folly is in places we don't expect, like love and friendship. We ignore flaws in those we care about and often act silly just to connect. Even intellectuals fall into a kind of folly, spending years writing books that only a few people may read, all while believing their work is of great importance. Erasmus pokes fun at philosophers too, comparing them to theatre critics who pull apart performances and ruin the magic. These so-called wise people often miss how useful illusions can be. Life isn't just about facts, it's also about feeling. The fool, by contrast, is free. They don't carry the weight of being right or respectable. They speak plainly because they don't know how to manipulate. And often, they speak the truth others avoid. Laughter, play, and a bit of silliness aren't just fun, they're vital. Folly isn't just something we all have, it's something we need. Embracing our foolish side helps us stay human. Some truths are better understood through a joke, a story, or even a clumsy mistake. There's a kind of deep wisdom that doesn't come from thinking, but from feeling. It's why folksy proverbs sometimes hit harder than academic theories. Fyodor Dostoevsky once wrote that the wisest person is the one who can admit they're a fool, if only once a month. That kind of humility is rare today. In literature, you'll often see the line between madness and wisdom blur. The The so-called madman ends up saying the most honest things. The wise fool is a real paradox. Someone labeled foolish turns out to have a deeper understanding than anyone else. Sometimes society dismisses people as crazy just to silence their uncomfortable truths. When someone speaks too boldly or sees too clearly, it's easier to call them mad than to face what they say. The ultimate example of this is Socrates. His way of teaching was to question others and show them the limits of their knowledge. He called himself wise only because he knew he didn't know everything. That self-awareness, knowing what you don't know, is its own kind of wisdom. As Shakespeare put it, the fool thinks he is wise, but the wise man knows he's a fool. There are two ways people can be fooled, either by accepting things that aren't true, or by ignoring the truth that's right in front of them. And when the truth becomes too uncomfortable or dangerous to say out loud, it's often the fool who steps up and says it anyway. That in itself is brave. The fool becomes the one who breaks the silence, saying what everyone else is thinking, but is too afraid to admit, and in doing so, brings a wave of relief. In general, there are two kinds of fools. There's the natural fool, someone who doesn't quite pick up on social norms and blurts out truths without realizing the weight of their words. Then there's the professional fool, someone who skillfully uses humor to sugarcoat uncomfortable truths so they're easier to swallow. The natural fool speaks from the heart, the professional from the head. Funny enough, the smartest fools are often sharper than the people laughing at them. What sets them apart is their fearlessness in telling the truth. And the real trick behind a good fool: they're often not fools at all. William Blake once said that if a fool keeps pushing through his foolishness, he'll eventually become wise. Fools, clowns, and tricksters all have something in common. They make us laugh, but they also stir something deeper, helping people release hidden emotions. Their role walks a fine line between order and chaos, laughter and warning. What might seem like a silly moment could actually carry a serious message. Søren Kierkegaard once warned that the world might end not in screams, but to the sound of laughter, as people treat a real crisis like a joke. Modern-day fools, especially the ones we see in comedy or satire, often reflect back to us what's really going on in society, and they usually come from a place of pain. That's the strange and sad twist behind many comedians. There's even a term for it: the sad clown paradox, where someone uses humor to cope with inner pain, often masking deep anger or sadness. While the audience laughs, they might also feel uneasy, unsure whether to laugh, pity, or even fear the clown. Some people are so disturbed by clowns that they develop coulrophobia, a fear of them entirely. That might be because today's clowns are stuck in a role where they always have to be funny, always have to smile, regardless of how they feel inside. This emotional split can wear them down, and over time, their darker side starts to creep out. Nowhere is this clearer than in the character of the Joker, one of pop culture's most famous villains. He embodies the shadow of the clown archetype. In medieval theater, clowns weren't just funny. They sometimes terrified the audience too, dragging them, symbolically, into hell through a monster's mouth known as the Hellmouth. So even back then, their humor came with a dark edge. There are also some key psychological differences between the fool and the trickster. The fool tends to be innocent and harmless, someone who wouldn't hurt anyone, and often ends up laughing at himself. The trickster, though, is more cunning. He manipulates, deceives, and enjoys getting a laugh out of someone else's embarrassment or failure. That twisted pleasure even has a name in German: Schadenfreude, finding joy in someone else's pain. A trickster might pretend to console someone while secretly enjoying their downfall. He'll take any chance to pull a prank or set someone up for humiliation. The fool doesn't operate like that. He's not laughing at others, but with them, or even at himself. That kind of self-deprecating humor makes people feel safe. When someone is willing to poke fun at themselves, it makes others drop their guard too. It builds real connection. It takes courage to look silly on purpose. But by doing so, the fool opens a door for honesty and vulnerability in the room. While the fool might be the punchline, his purpose is to make others feel better, even if it costs him a bit of dignity. He brings warmth, even during tense or painful times. The trickster, on the other hand, isn't interested in comfort. He's in it for his own amusement, no matter how others feel. His jokes have hidden barbs, and he loves to set traps people don't see coming. You never know whether he's joking or scheming, and that mystery is part of his power. Back in medieval courts, the jester had an official role: to entertain the elite. But they did more than just juggle or tell jokes. Sometimes, they were the only ones allowed to tell the truth to kings and queens, as long as it was disguised as humor. Behind the makeup and the mischief, both the fool and the trickster reveal the strange, powerful role of comedy in human life. How it can entertain, expose, heal, and even hurt all at once. Music, storytelling, satire, comedy, juggling, and even acrobatics. These were all once part of a fool's toolkit. People used to believe that having a fool around helped ward off bad luck or evil spirits. But that idea isn't just some old superstition. It reflects a deep psychological truth that still holds up today. Letting the fool have a place in our lives helps us stay grounded. It gives us permission to loosen up, challenge our routines, and let new energy and perspective in. Without that playful and honest voice, our inner world can become stale, dry, and lifeless. Back in the Middle Ages, there was a celebration called the Feast of Fools, held by lower-ranking clergy on New Year's Day. For just one day, the rules were flipped upside down. The sacred was mocked, church leaders were teased, and the people at the bottom of the social ladder were free to let out their pent-up frustrations, desires, and rebellious energy. It was a way to let off steam before everything went back to normal. Eventually, the church tried to suppress these wild celebrations, but the spirit of the fool lived on, especially in royal courts. At court, fools played a special role. The king himself gave them permission to speak openly, even to poke fun at royalty. They existed in a strange in-between space, both part of the system and outside of it. They could get away with saying things no one else dared to say, often through jokes or clever jabs. To mark their unique status, they wore mock versions of the king's crown and carried a bauble, a stick with a carved head, kind of like a puppet, which could speak on their behalf when the jester wanted to play it safe. Because they were so close to the king, jesters had more freedom than others and were often protected from punishment. Still, some crossed the line and paid the price. Some were even executed. Fools represent what society tends to reject. They challenge the rules and often get labeled as misfits or troublemakers. But every society needs them. They shake things up, question what's taken for granted, and help keep culture alive and dynamic. In medieval courts, many fools had physical differences: dwarves, hunchbacks, or people born with deformities. They usually came from poor families and were seen as burdens, but because of how they looked, they were placed in court to entertain. Oddly enough, their uniqueness was often seen as a divine sign, and they were treasured by royalty, sometimes even given as gifts between noble families. These individuals, set apart by their bodies, often developed deep emotional insight. Forced to live outside the norm, many found wisdom in their isolation. In Shakespeare's King Lear, the fool plays a powerful emotional role. When Lear is stripped of power and surrounded by only a few knights, he becomes painfully lonely and constantly asks for his fool. The fool becomes his closest companion, his shadow, his truth-teller, his mirror. Fools like this often flip the power dynamics. Though technically lower in status, they say things others can't and rely on the very people they mock to keep their place in the world. Shakespeare exaggerated these characters for drama, but they were rooted in real court jesters who used wit to outsmart those with more authority. The legend of Parsifal, from old Arthurian tales, also centers around a fool. Known as the young fool, Parsifal grows up sheltered by his mother. One day, he sees a group of knights and is so inspired by their appearance that he decides to leave home and become one himself. His journey is long and full of tests that slowly turn him from boy to man. Meanwhile, in the story's mythical Grail Castle, everything is falling apart. The ruler, the Fisher King, has been badly wounded. He can't heal, but he also can't die. His injury has made him sterile, and as a result, his kingdom has turned to dust. This mythical wound reflects something deeply human. It's symbolic of how emotional or psychological pain can spill into our outer lives. Every teenager experiences their own Fisher King wound, a painful moment where they lose innocence and realize that life isn't just joy and wonder. Growing up is tough. It means facing uncomfortable truths and stepping into a more self-aware way of living. And in both mythology and real life, it's often the fool, mocked, underestimated, yet deeply insightful, who helps us navigate that path. Still, that first encounter with the wound becomes the starting point for future healing. In the Grail Castle, there's a solemn ritual that takes place each night. A maiden holds the Holy Grail, filled with wine, and whoever drinks from it has their deepest wish granted. But the Fisher King doesn't take part. He remains alone, suffering silently. No matter how beautiful or sacred things are around him, his inner pain keeps him from fully experiencing them. It's one of the deepest forms of suffering, to be surrounded by joy and grace, yet be cut off from them. Long before, the court fool had made a prophecy that the Fisher King would only be healed when an innocent fool arrived and asked a particular question. One day, Parsifal comes across a man fishing in a boat on a lake. It's the Fisher King. Parsifal asks for a place to stay, and the king guides him to the Grail Castle. That night, Parsifal witnesses the sacred ceremony, yet says nothing, even as the Fisher King groans in agony nearby. Parsifal remembers his mother's advice to stay quiet and not ask questions, a sign of his deep attachment to her, and a symbol of being stuck in a mother complex. He forgets what his mentor taught him and misses the moment. The next morning, the castle has vanished. He walks away, empty-handed, and it takes him 2 painful decades to find his way back. That's where the original story ends. The castle is always there, but we can only see it when we're ready to see with new eyes. Later versions of the tale continue. When Parsifal finally returns, he asks the Fisher King, "Whom does the Grail serve?" That one question heals the king and restores life and peace to the kingdom. The Grail represents the source of meaning in life. To find meaning is to serve the Grail, what some might call the higher self. Jungian analyst Robert A. Johnson once wrote that a man must be willing to turn to the most innocent, adolescent part of himself to find healing. Only the fool inside us can reach the wound of the Fisher King. In Don Quixote, often considered the first modern novel, Cervantes tells the story of a man who reads too many books about knights and chivalry and loses his grip on reality. He reinvents himself as Don Quixote, a wandering knight out to defend the helpless and defeat evil. But in practice, he ends up doing more harm than good. He fights in the name of a peasant woman he imagines to be a princess, though she never appears in the story. The word quixotic comes from him, describing someone who's idealistic to the point of being completely out of touch. In one of the most famous scenes, he charges at windmills, believing they're giants. That's where we get the phrase, tilting at windmills, meaning to fight imaginary enemies. Don Quixote isn't alone in his madness. He convinces a simple, grounded man named Sancho Panza to be his squire. Sancho rides a donkey and follows him, mainly because he's promised wealth and reward. Sancho represents realism, constantly baffled by Quixote's delusions. But even though Quixote means well, he causes harm because he can't see the world clearly. To most people, he's not just foolish, he's outright insane. And yet, he's clever and even insightful when he avoids the topic of knighthood. That contrast serves as a reminder that even brilliant minds can fall prey to their own illusions. By the end of the novel, Don Quixote becomes ill, falls into a deep sleep, and wakes up with a clear mind. He realizes his whole journey was a fantasy. The tone shifts from comedy to tragedy. People who once mocked him now pity him and beg him to hold on to his dream, insisting that he is a knight. But now he sees reality for what it is, and with that realization comes heartbreak. The illusions that once gave him purpose are gone, and he dies, essentially from too much reality. It raises the question, is it better to know the painful truth or to live in a blissful dream? Dostoevsky wrestles with this same dilemma in The Idiot. He introduces Prince Mishkin, an innocent and kind-hearted man returning to Russian society after being treated for epilepsy and what was then called idiocy. Right from the start, during a train ride to St. Petersburg, he's thrown into a world full of corruption and manipulation. Unlike comic fools in other stories, Mishkin represents pure innocence and moral beauty in a decaying world. Dostoevsky describes him bluntly. First of all, this prince is an idiot, and secondly, he is a fool, knows nothing of the world, and has no place in it. Mishkin's goodness clashes with the ugliness around him, showing how society often can't handle someone so pure. He doesn't fit, not because he's wrong, but because the world is too broken to accept him. Like Quixote and Parsifal, he reminds us that sometimes what looks like foolishness is actually a kind of deeper wisdom, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is listen to the part of ourselves that still believes, still hopes, and still dares to ask the question that could heal us all. Mishkin's genuine heart, childlike innocence, and lack of social polish serve as a kind of mirror to the cold, self-serving, status-obsessed world he steps into. He doesn't know how to play the game. He speaks plainly, without putting on a front to impress anyone, and expresses exactly what he's feeling, no matter who's in the room. Because of this, people dismiss him as an idiot, even though he often understands people better than they understand themselves, and reflects a deep, almost spiritual understanding of compassion and what it means to live with Christian values. His complete opposite is Hippolyte, a bitter young man who's dying from tuberculosis. A staunch atheist and nihilist, Hippolyte has lost all hope and lashes out at everything: society, nature, and God. He famously says it's better to suffer and know the truth than to live happily in ignorance. Mishkin, on the other hand, can't understand why someone would choose to be miserable. He doesn't theorize. He spends time with broken people, trying to help them, sometimes in small, unnoticed ways. To him, kindness is the only thing that truly matters. The theme of redemption runs through the story. The soul is saved not through pride, but through humility, compassion, and grace. One of the novel's most quoted lines is Mishkin's claim that beauty will save the world. We see this same theme in fairy tales, where three brothers appear, and the youngest, the one everyone mocks as a fool, ends up becoming the hero. He charges into situations others fear, and somehow, against all odds, wins the princess and the kingdom. This fool often seems to have luck, or even magic on his side. His approach is wild and spontaneous, mixing foolishness with flashes of real wisdom. When the mix is right, miracles happen. But when it's all out of balance, it turns into chaos. A famous figure in Russian folklore who represents this idea is Ivan the Fool. Tolstoy even wrote a story by that name. In it, Ivan is the youngest of three sons in a poor family. He's mocked for being too kind and too forgiving, even when people take advantage of him. His two older brothers are tempted by wealth and military success, but Ivan chooses a simple life. He lives on a farm, looks after his elderly father and mute sister, and works the land. Eventually, his brothers come asking for their share of the inheritance. Their father refuses, reminding them that Ivan and his sister have stayed to help. But Ivan, always generous, agrees to split things with them. This lack of conflict doesn't sit well with the devil, who sends mischievous little demons to each brother to stir up greed and trouble. The brothers fall for it, but Ivan, though struck with illness, keeps working through it all and doesn't give up. The three devils unite to try to destroy him, but Ivan outsmarts them each time. When he catches them, they beg for mercy, offering to grant him a wish. He innocently replies, "God bless you," and they vanish. With his new powers, he can turn leaves into gold and straw into soldiers. But instead of hoarding wealth or building an army, he shares his riches with villagers and creates cheerful, dancing soldiers for entertainment. Eventually, the devil himself comes after Ivan, and still fails. While Ivan follows his heart and believes in myths and miracles, his brothers trust only in logic and control. But in the end, Ivan marries the Tsar's daughter. The man with nothing ends up with everything. The fool becomes the hero. In tarot, the fool is often shown holding a white rose, a symbol of innocence and purity, in one hand, and a small bag in the other. He's carefree, gazing up at the sky, ready to embrace the unknown. But he's so absorbed in his excitement that he doesn't notice a cliff edge just ahead, while a small dog tries to warn him. The tarot has its roots in 15th century Italy, from illustrated playing cards called trionfi, used in parades and festivities. These evolved into tarocchi, from the word daroch, which means foolishness. That's why the journey through the tarot is often called the Fool's Journey. By the 18th century, tarot became associated with mystical practices, like fortune-telling. Mystics divided the 78 cards into two groups, the 22 major arcana and the 56 minor arcana. The Fool is numbered 0, both the beginning and outside the sequence, and is usually the first card in the major arcana. The final card is the World, which shows a figure dancing inside a laurel wreath, representing completion and wholeness. Here, the Fool, now transformed, becomes the cosmic dancer, the anima mundi, or world soul. The journey from innocence to cosmic awareness begins and ends with the Fool. As soon as the journey toward wholeness seems to end, it starts all over again. It's not a final destination, but a lifelong unfolding. The Fool stands at both the beginning and the end of this cycle. What makes him heroic is his willingness to step out of his comfort zone into the unknown with nothing but curiosity and trust. His path mirrors the classic hero's journey, where the hero answers a call to adventure, leaves the familiar world behind, and enters a realm full of tests, fears, and challenges. There, he must face what he's avoided, his inner demons, a painful memory, or a life-altering truth, and seek the treasure that can't be easily won. That treasure could be wisdom, healing, or some deep inner truth. The journey isn't just physical, it's a symbolic death and rebirth, where part of the old self is left behind so a new self can emerge. The hero eventually returns to the world he left, carrying the gift he found, something that might bring hope, healing, or just the strength to survive. The Fool is always moving, ever-changing, and strangely timeless. He's said to be the strongest of all the tarot cards, not because he holds power, but because he represents pure potential. He's the gateway to life's great mysteries. Each card in the major arcana shows a moment or challenge we all go through on the path to becoming whole. What Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are. Tarot can be used in a psychological sense too. Jungians use a technique called amplification, which helps bring clarity to symbols or dreams by connecting them to stories, myths, religious images, and art. The Fool is marked with the number 0, which makes sense. It's not just a number, but a symbol of infinite possibility. It's a circle, an endless loop, just like the ancient Egyptian image of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, symbolizing eternity and the endless return. This circle holds deep meaning. It's the source, the place where everything begins and ends, where time doesn't really exist. Philosophers and mystics have often said that God is like an infinite sphere with a center everywhere and no edges. A circle with a dot in the middle is also the ancient symbol for the sun, the source of all light, warmth, and life. It also represents the world egg, a symbol of birth and creation, of paradise before we were burdened by self-awareness. It's a symbol of the original unity, before we split the world into opposites. Our longing for childhood innocence often reflects this ancient desire to return to that complete, timeless state. In Jung's psychology, the dot represents the ego, the center of our conscious self, while the circle stands for the self, the whole psyche, including both what we know and what lies beneath. Jung once said, "It is not I who create myself. Rather, I happen to myself." That quote captures the Fool perfectly. Someone not trying to force life, but letting life unfold through him. In modern playing cards, the Fool lives on as the Joker, and throughout history he's been shown in all kinds of ways. Sometimes a madman, sometimes a beggar, sometimes a wandering sage. In the Visconti Forza tarot deck from the 1400s, one of the oldest surviving sets, the Fool is shown as a poor traveler in tattered clothes, barefoot, with feathers in his hair, maybe symbolizing the wild man spirit. In the Solabusca tarot, made in the late 15th century, the Fool plays a bagpipe and wears a feathered headdress. In the German Hofemterspiel from the same era, he's barefoot, wears bells, and carries a pipe, much like a jester. In the Mandinga Tarocchi, he's shown as a half-naked old man with a staff, labeled misero, or beggar, with an animal trying to catch his attention. These depictions all reflect something deeper. The Fool is so in touch with his instincts that he doesn't need to watch where he's going. He trusts his intuition, not logic. In one old French card, he's even blindfolded, emphasizing this inward vision. Another old Swiss card shows him in full jester attire, holding a wand. Later decks, like the Tarot of Marseille, show him with a sack over his shoulder and a dog, either nipping at him or tagging along playfully. By the time the Rider-Waite deck came out in 1909, illustrated by Pamela Colman Smith, under the guidance of mystic Arthur Edward Waite, the Fool was shown as a young man about to step off a cliff, smiling at the sky, holding a white rose and a small bundle, while a little dog barks at his heels. Each version adds something new to the Fool's image, but at the heart of it all, he's still the same, a symbol of freedom, trust, transformation, and the endless dance between foolishness and wisdom. Psychologically, the Fool archetype represents the spark that ignites transformation. It's the beginning of something new. Without the Fool, nothing would ever begin. Throughout history, inventors and visionaries have often been seen as fools, especially at the start of their journey, and sometimes even at the end. The Zen concept of Shoshin, or beginner's mind, speaks to this idea. It's the opposite of being closed off or thinking you already know everything. In a beginner's mind, there's room for endless possibilities. In the mind of an expert, the options shrink. Staying open leads to moments of quiet awareness, the kind of silence where something deeper, something sacred, can be felt. But if you can't even hear the person sitting next to you, how will you ever hear the voice of silence? Our senses have incredible potential, but they're often dulled because we don't really pay attention. Jung once said, "The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom." Taking the first step toward discovering who you really are can seem foolish to society. We're taught to follow a straight path: school, job, marriage, retirement. Anyone who dares to step off that path is often judged as foolish, doomed to failure or poverty. But the first step, though scary, is everything. As the old Chinese saying goes, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The Fool is excited about what lies ahead. He's not stuck in fear or overthinking. He lives in the moment, adapts quickly, and throws himself into life. Meanwhile, the overthinker gets stuck, paralyzed by what-ifs. Many of us are more afraid of uncertainty than of actual failure. So we talk ourselves out of trying, preferring the pain we know over the unknown that might bring something better. This cycle of overthinking creates anxiety. We suffer more in our imagination than in the real world. But failure isn't always a dead end. It can lead to paths we never dreamed of. What seems like the worst outcome may be the thing that leads us to something great. The alchemists had a saying, "In filth, it will be found." The treasure we seek is often hidden in the place we least want to look. The Fool doesn't know what he's walking into, and that's exactly why he's able to take the first step. If he saw every obstacle ahead, he might never begin. But he moves forward anyway, open to what's next, trusting the path, even if it's bumpy. He's not afraid of exploring new ground, even when warned about the dangers. And no matter how many times he falls, he gets back up. Every great person has made mistakes. The journey itself is what shapes us, not the destination. As T.S. Eliot once said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Still, the Fool isn't perfect. Sometimes he charges ahead without stopping to reflect. He can be so wrapped up in his momentum that he trips and falls. That's the shadow side of the Fool. He teeters on the edge, sometimes literally. Our inner voice, which should protect us, can also turn into a harsh critic. Don't ask that. It's a stupid question. People will laugh at you. You're ridiculous. This is the voice of fear, conformity, and shame. It keeps us small, craving approval instead of pursuing what really matters. When we ignore or suppress the fool within us, we get stuck in jealousy, shame, and bitterness. The fool plays a double role on the road to becoming who we truly are. He both pushes us forward and holds us back. He's tied to the eternal youth we all carry inside us. That inner youth can either breathe life, creativity, and wonder into adulthood, or trap us in immature fantasies, making us feel like life is a cage. The fool is deeply connected to the child archetype. Children aren't burdened by fake masks. They follow their instincts, not the voice of society or Freud's superego. The child is halfway into the rational world. The madman, halfway out of it. In a way, both escape the relentless pressure of adult life, the constant noise, expectations, and sensory overload that most people just learn to tolerate. The fool stays light-hearted, playful, and hopeful. He doesn't take life too seriously. Nietzsche once said that true maturity means regaining the seriousness of a child at play. That's the kind of presence the fool carries, serious enough to care, but free enough to dance. Jungian scholar Marie-Louise von Franz saw the fool as symbolizing the inferior function, the least developed part of our psyche. According to Jung, we each rely on one of four main ways of engaging with the world: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting. The fool often lives in that shadow space, the part we don't fully understand, and that's exactly why he holds the key to who we're becoming. For instance, someone who relies heavily on thinking would likely have feeling as their least developed function. But the archetype of the fool goes deeper than just psychological imbalances. The fool isn't just about what's missing. It touches something sacred. Marie-Louise von Franz describes the fool as an archetypal religious figure, someone who represents a part of the human soul, or even all of humanity, that has been left behind by modern development, and, because of that, still holds a sense of natural wholeness. The fool plays a unique spiritual role. In myths, when the fool shows up as the fourth member in a group of four, it usually signals he represents the inferior function, the weak spot in the personality that's often mocked or ignored. But paradoxically, that's also where transformation begins. The fool. Hero stands for the part of us we try to hide, the silly, awkward, or misunderstood part. But he's also the link to our unconscious self, the hidden totality of who we really are. That's why the fool is so powerful. He walks between two worlds, the one we live in every day, and the one of dreams, symbols, and imagination. He holds the key to renewal, to healing the deep inner wound known in mythology as the Fisher King's wound. It's through our weakest part, the one we want to avoid, that true healing and integration begin. The holy fool dares to go against the grain. He's not afraid to be laughed at, insulted, or pushed aside, if that's what it takes to live truthfully and love boldly. His strength lies in being fully himself, no matter who's watching, without the need to adjust his values to fit in or please others. He doesn't judge people by typical standards. Instead, he meets each person as they are, with open presence and compassion. That's why the holy fool is such a threat to power structures. He can't be bought, bribed, or manipulated. He lives from the heart, and that kind of integrity is deeply unsettling to systems that thrive on control. At the core of this figure is a radical belief that every human being is worthy of love, not because they've earned it, but because love itself is unconditional. That's the spiritual life we're all capable of living. The idea of being a fool for Christ comes straight from the Apostle Paul. He wrote that God has turned the wisdom of the world upside down, and that those who think they are wise have become fools. Choosing spiritual foolishness over worldly smarts often means rejecting status, comfort, or material success in favor of something deeper and more lasting, even if it brings mockery or misunderstanding. The fool paves the way for the savior figure. He comes first, stumbling and sincere, opening the door for something greater to follow. Paul's words are clear. If anyone among you thinks he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, so that he may become truly wise. Sometimes, the only way to real wisdom is through the willingness to look like a fool.